In the West, inside Donald Trump's private quarters, we catch up with one of the very few to be allowed through the golden doors of Trump Tower this week. Hello and welcome to the part of the Sunday Politics local for you here in the west of England. Coming up, we talk trains as the West's electric dreams lose their spark. Over budget and delayed, the government has shunted some of the electrification of the Great Western Main Line into the sidings. And ever wanted to step inside Donald Trump's private quarters? We hear from someone who's popped into Trump Tower only this week.
It's like walking into Tutankhamun's live home, and everything is opulent. It looks bling, but at the same time it kind of works, if that makes sense. And that door is extraordinary.
And from the Trump to our little dump, but we like it here at Broadcasting House. And in the studio with me this week, two men who are still waiting for their invite from Mr. Trump. Come on, Donald. I'm sure it's in the post. They are the Conservative MP for Wales, that's James Heappey, and the former Mayor of Bristol, George Ferguson. Welcome to you both. Mr. Ferguson, it's good to see you again after a bit of a gap. I want to talk about money, first of all, because the new mayor has been going around trying to find ways of filling the budget, £90 million worth of cuts. You left him with no cash, didn't you?
No, I cut an enormous amount out of the system. I had to do it. And I think it's a political tradition, isn't it, to look to the last administration. But I have to say that I think Marvin's behaved impeccably. I don't think he's been trying to blame me. Maybe others are. And all these things were known. I knew that we were going to have to take about 600 jobs out of the system. I think that's the real number. But if we were to meet the challenge that central government gave us,
saying that during the election campaign, but you knew.
I knew that we were going to have to. Oh, I did. I made it very clear that we were going to have to make more savings, and I made that very clear. It was all
1,000 jobs.
No, I didn't. No, well, it wasn't 1,000 jobs. That was post the election. Somebody came up with 1,000 jobs. But if you look at the reality, it's not going to be 1,000 jobs.
Okay. How many is it going to be?
I think 600, which I always thought.
Okay. James, this is another example of austerity. The new mayor is very keen for the government not to make cuts because he says that they just produce further costs further down the road. People are sort of sick of it, aren't they? I mean, why can't just local government be funded properly?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to hear big cities worrying about their funding. The real injustice in local government funding is the way that budgets are being cut more quickly for rural county councils than they are being cut for cities. So yes, there's the issue of austerity and the fact that budgets are being driven across the piece, but actually the cuts that county councils in rural areas like Somerset are being asked to make are far greater than those in the cities. And I've just been made chair of the Rural Fair Share campaign in Parliament, and I'm going to make sure that rural areas like Somerset get their fair share.
At the expense of cities?
Well, sometimes that might need to be the case.
But cities have by far the biggest social issues to deal with, and so I think there is a real need.
We could do an
hour.
Hour on that, George. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that in some ways, where there is concentrated deprivation, it is easier to tackle than when you have isolated deprivation as you do in rural areas. But that may be for another show, perhaps.
But James, another hour, that would be generous. But look, the question was very briefly about austerity. Do we need it anymore? Why not fund all local government properly?
Well, I think that there is an argument for taking advantage of low interest rates in order to invest in infrastructure, certainly. We're talking about rail later on. There's a great example of where I think government could make a business case for it. But borrowing to spend in year, I think, is quite reckless.
So you support austerity, but you don't support
I suspect the autumn statement will see some borrowing for infrastructure, but not for in-year spending.
Okay, thank you. When the electrification of the Great Western Railway was announced, Her Majesty's opposition warned it would put a strain on public finances. Well, that was the Conservatives back in 2009, when they were in opposition. But under their watch in government, the cost has soared by more than £1 billion, and everything's running years behind schedule. So what's gone wrong? Here's Paul Baltrop.
We've set aside the money because this is an important priority for our country. Faster, cheaper, and also in the long run greener.
Remember this? The fanfare when government announced the costly electrification of the GWR and the warnings that came from the other side.
The government are funding it by maxing out Network Rail's credit cards, which will be left with the taxpayer to meet the bill ultimately, because the taxpayer guarantees Network Rail's debts.
So it was halted when they got into power a year later, before being relaunched by an up-and-coming Conservative Transport Secretary.
This is literally a new age of rail in Britain.
But the deal he agreed has gone horribly wrong. The National Audit Office say there are delays of up to 3 years. The cost of electrification has soared by £1.2 billion. It talks of the Department for Transport's failure to plan and manage in a sufficiently joined-up way. But the heaviest criticism is of Network Rail. As Rail Minister until the summer, Claire Perry frequently found herself in the firing line. But over electrification, she feels able to deflect most of the blame.
Well, I wrestled with this for years as a minister, but actually, and you're right, I think what we have all collectively realised is we have to hold Network Rail much more closely to account. So they have got to improve the way they deliver this money, but equally, I don't want government writing them a blank cheque.
Spending has been reined in. Electrification has been put on hold between Bath and central Bristol and up to Parkway. That has alarmed everyone from passengers to the line's operators.
I think it's disgusting. We should have new trains in place. They don't run all the way to Bristol. What's the point?
I think they need to get on and get the job done.
It seems to be something that Britain can't do, can it? We can't keep projects on time and on budget.
Well, customers will be disappointed again that we've seen another delay in the programme. However, the work that we've done with the Department for Transport over the last 12 months means that actually it will have minimum effect on the benefits we expect to deliver customers, which we still expect to deliver by 2019. And what's really important is that we don't see any further delays.
Twice this week in Parliament, MPs raised concerns with the Transport Secretary.
I'm not pretty happy about the way in which the modernisation, the electrification programme has been managed, but I'm committed to making sure this project is delivered and the improvements it brings will happen for passengers.
The official position is that electrification is still planned for the lines in and out of Temple Meads, and let's hope to get it done by 2024. But with all the new trains being converted to also run on diesel, given the fact that electric trains couldn't actually run any faster on the twisting tracks around Bristol, many experts have told me they doubt electrification will ever happen here.
I think it's rather ironic that Bristol was a green city in 2015, green city of Europe, and yet they don't have a sustainable method of getting there. Bristol people should be very unhappy, and they need to seek a date where they can firmly expect to be electrified.
The big timetable change, with more and faster services up to London, won't now be until 2019, a decade after electrification was first launched.
Paul Baltrop there. Well, James, delivering electrification was a key government promise. Why can't it be carried out?
Well, it would appear that Network Rail and the DfT have made a real mess of this, and I'm very angry about it. It's not just about the journey times from Paddington to Bristol Templemead, because I accept that the bimodal trains will probably go that last few miles between Bath and Bristol at just the same speed as an electric one would. Actually, the really big impact here is that the deferral of parts of the electrification programme in the Thames Valley means that the rolling stock that should have been coming down from the Thames Valley to sort out capacity issues here in Bristol won't come, which means that down in Devon and Cornwall they won't get the rolling stock that we have here to sort out their capacity issues down there. This is a huge problem that has knock-on effects across our region, and I am really angry that we find ourselves in this position.
Who are you angry with, James?
I'm angry at Network Rail.
And just remind me, who owns Network Rail?
Well, you interrupted me just as I was about to say, and I'm angry at the Department for Transport, and I've made that clear in Parliament. I've asked a number of questions.
Just to be clear, the Network Rail is owned by the government?
I've said that twice, yes.
Right, OK, so then in that case, can you explain why they're not pushing forward and carrying out what you promised in your manifesto?
Well, as you've seen, you showed the clip of Kerry McCartney's question in the segment before this, but you know I think that I've asked 2 questions on this in the House this week, and I've had a number of conversations with Chris Grayling as well. I think that we made a very clear commitment to the South West Peninsula in our manifesto that as a result of electrifying the Great Western Railway, we would improve journey times and we would free up rolling stock to come down from the Thames Valley to improve rail capacity in the South West. I intend to hold the government to account for delivering that commitment.
George, is it a big deal, or can we just manage with how we are at the moment?
No, I think it's betrayal, and I actually think that it is going to have an effect. I mean, you've got to bear in mind that Bath and Bristol, Bath has 5 million passengers a year going through the station. Temple Meads has 10 million. We are both positive contributors to the national economy. Part of that depends on our links with London and the South East. And this will have a negative economic effect. So I do regard it as absolute betrayal.
Is it something to do with local government and sort of the political force in the West Country? I can't imagine Nicola Sturgeon putting up with this in Scotland, can you?
Well, I had really good meetings with Sir Peter Hendy of Network Rail and with transport ministers, and I was promised that this would happen. I knew there was going to be delays till 2019. Now we're talking about 2024, if at all, and that I do think is outrageous. I do see it as broken promises.
James?
No, I think it's an interesting point, actually. There is the Midlands Engine Room, there is the Northern Powerhouse. There are sort of brands to regional economic development elsewhere. In the South West, we haven't quite figured out what that is. Bristol and Bath and those on the M4 corridor seem to be doing their thing. Somerset, Devon, Plymouth doing theirs, Cornwall doing something on their own. Is that counting against us? I mean, this isn't to excuse the government and Network Rail's failure in this area, but maybe if as a peninsula we had a clearer sense of purpose, a clearer sense of collective identity, we might find that we're able to make a pitch that's more compelling to ministers seeking sound bites.
In the end of the day, I mean, the costs are huge and they have overrun, but in the general scheme of things, we're a rich country. Surely we should be able to electrify a line from London to Bristol.
Well, you would think so. And I think that notwithstanding the carbon issues or the carbon benefits of having electrified, actually there's an economic benefit in doing so as well. And as we get the westward link from the Great Western Railway into Heathrow, all of these things that will unlock our region as a place to inwardly invest, we just got to do them.
Okay? Yeah, but it's peanuts compared with HS2.
Okay, yes, that's very true. Well, look, we did try to get Network Rail on the programme, but there was no one available. Now, Theresa May might have been 9th on his list of world leaders to ring in when he won the presidency, but Donald Trump insists he still holds a special place in his heart for us here in the little old UK. Robin Markwell has been to meet one of the privileged few to step inside the doors of Trump Tower.
Mr. Donald, look at that amazing door.
As photos on your phone go, Andy Wigmore's is hard to beat. Way before any world leader, he was one of the very first to pass through the gilded doors of Trump Tower.
It's like walking into Tutankhamun's live home, and everything is opulent, but it feels right, weirdly. These paintings are Renoirs and all sorts of fancy artists. They fit. So it looks bling, but at the same time it kind of works, if that makes sense. And that door is extraordinary.
Mr Wigmore is head of communications for the campaign group Leave.eu. Out of this South Gloucestershire call centre, they rallied the Brexit vote. And after their success, the now president-elect was often in touch for advice during his campaign, sometimes accidentally.
I think he probably pressed the wrong button. He said, Andy, I just want to ask a couple of things. Nigel this, Nigel that. Fine. But he's in front of you. You know what FaceTime's like. My kids couldn't quite get their heads around it. My wife was screaming, who's that? But I know it sounds bizarre, but it's kind of normal with him because that's how he operates.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Trump's prediction of delivering what he called Brexit +++ came true, and both campaigns had plenty in common.
The parallels between Brexit and their campaign, for us, were very personal again. We borrowed some of their techniques, we used the same people, and certainly I know they were monitoring everything that we did forensically. Trump discovered the power of social media and what it meant. He could have a direct conversation with people and they could interact. And there's an honesty about social media, which he understood. So when he was outrageous, he knew the more outrageous he was, the more attention he would get. The more attention he got, the more outrageous he was. Understood that early on.
Who's going to pay for the wall? Who?
We couldn't quite get our heads around, okay, it seems to work. It worked. And the more outrageous we were, the more attention we got. And so there was parallels. He obviously took it to the most extreme level. I don't think we were as bombastic necessarily as he was, but we certainly had moments.
Many are still reeling from Trump's surprise win. Ex-Mayor of Bristol, George Ferguson, flew the US flag at half-mast. But is it politicians who are the ones who are really out of touch?
I think the great thing about Brexit, the great thing about Trump, it's the change in the world dynamic of politics. And people feel empowered. It's not anarchy. It's very much that they want to be heard and they don't want the political classes to ignore them. And that's very potent, isn't it?
Mr Wigmore, together with the millionaire businessman Aaron Banks, are the self-styled bad boys of Brexit. And their time in the political spotlight is far from over. After pouring £8 million of his own money into the referendum, Mr Banks is now funding 2 QCs to examine the details of the Article 50 case. He also unveiled plans this week to drain what he called the swamp in the House of Commons. He set aside £10 million to fund up to 200 parliamentary candidates who might run against what he calls lazy, ineffective and corrupt MPs. He also wants to abolish the House of Lords and set a minimum age limit of 40 for anyone running for the Commons.
We've got a little list and we think that it needs to be looked at. Whether or not that happens, we don't know, but we have a powerful movement. You can't ignore certainly some of what we've got to say.
Their special relationship goes on, with both Andy Wigmore and Bristol businessman Aaron Banks due to be guests of honour at President Trump's inauguration in January.
Wow. Well, George, you're an architect. What do you make of Trump Tower and the internal decoration?
I think it's vulgar, glitzy and American greed at its worst, and I wrote that in 1988, having been there. It horrifies me, and the reason that flag is flying at half-mast is that I see it as death of the American dream that anybody who comes to America has an equal opportunity. And clearly the words, and I do believe the words, sadly, the words against immigrants in America have been very, very damaging.
Having said that, he obviously plugged in, didn't he, to a feeling in Middle America and actually perhaps elsewhere, as the Brexit people have done, that they're looking after the little guy. He's got their interests at heart in a way that the big political parties haven't done.
He actually got a minority of the votes, as you know, and that Clinton won the popular vote. So America's got a very strange system, but I think that what he's done is extremely damaging. I think, this is all part of the post-Brexit, post-truth movement, and I think it's extremely worrying.
James?
Well, I think we have to be very careful. So Trump is not necessarily to my taste. I wouldn't have voted for him if I'd been given the choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. But he did just win an election. And I think that those of us that are not wanting to accept that result, or those people who don't want to accept it, just need to be careful about the criticism that they poured on Donald Trump when he threatened not to accept the result. And the result is what it is. Everybody knew there was an electoral college. And I have a lot of respect for George, but, flying the American flag at half-mast, American democracy made a decision, and they've elected their president. Whether he's to our taste or not, he won. It's our job to now work with him.
Whatever his views on minorities and so on.
We as a nation don't get a vote in the United States general election. Of course, if he goes on to enact things that we find to be unacceptable, for example, going away from climate change, banning Muslims from visiting his country, we will have a responsibility as part of the international community to challenge him over that. But ultimately, America is a sovereign nation. They have a democratic process. They've elected their president.
Okay. Americans in this country have been very supportive of what I did, and they felt that I was speaking for them.
How many?
And that's Well, I mean, the Americans. I've had a lot of contacts on social media backing it, and I think it was just a statement, as I made when I bought that flag to fly when Obama won.
Okay, well, let's just move on to the wider issues and the visit by Aaron Banks, the local businessman who's funded a lot of the Brexit campaign and so on, and his assistant, Mr. Wigmore. Do you think it would be a good idea to harness the abilities of Mr. Farage to build a bridge between us and the United States?
No, I don't, because I think that Nigel Farage has an agenda and a political allegiance that is very clear, and I suspect that any such role would be rather used for his own aggrandisement. However, it's very clear that there is, from what we've seen of the way that Donald Trump has interacted with Nigel Farage, that there's a way that he does business. We'd do well to learn from that and get involved as quickly as we can.
Okay, the next scheme that Mr. Banks has got is to fund up to 200 candidates to what they call drain the swamp of people that they don't think are suitable to be MPs, including those actually who are under 40. I don't know how old you are.
Yeah, I'm 36. 35.
Yeah, right. So you wouldn't even be able to stand under those rules.
And I loved watching that sort of PR man in his very nice office with a very posh suit, looking very well kept, sort of pontificating over that. I've done 3 combat tours of Iraq and Afghanistan, and I reckon I've got an experience that is something to offer. And you have to be very careful about saying things like that, especially from your perch as a millionaire or PR man.
George?
I think that is it's up to him, but I hate the way that money is buying success in politics. I think it's a very bad Americanization of our politics.
Okay, thank you. Well, time now for our roundup of the week in just 60 seconds with our Robin.
Ofsted issued a damning report about Swindon schools. It said they were a cause of serious concern and that children in the town were being failed at every level. Head teachers and the council said the criticisms were overly harsh.
To give it just a one-sided view out straight to the parent and the media is dangerous, is not helpful, and it's going to worry a lot of people, really.
230 jobs are set to go at the GKN factory in Yeovil. The firm announced it would close the plant that makes helicopter parts at the end of next year.
We are doing all we can to try to look at lateral thinking to try to make sure that there is a future for that skill set.
In Bath, the Tories strengthened their control on the council by picking up a seat from the Greens in a by-election. And plans to roll out a fleet of buses powered by human waste have gone down the toilet. First Bus in Bristol had trialled this vehicle on the aptly named Number 2 route, but the government flushed away hopes when it refused to spend a penny on grants to keep it going.
I'll have a word with him later, don't worry. Just coming up, the autumn statement next week. That's when the government announces how much it's going to spend on things. Just 2 thoughts, really. Your wish list. James, what do you want the money to be used for?
Infrastructure investment.
Including the Great Western Track.
Broadband, railway, roads, mobile networks, our energy system. All of those things will drive productivity and growth. Money well spent.
That's what Mr. Trump is suggesting, of course, in the United States.
And there we go, we agree already.
And George?
Clean energy and devolution to the city regions.
Okay. We shall see. Thank you. And that is all we have time for this week. My thanks to my guests. That's James Heappey, of course, and George Ferguson. But now it's time to return to London and Andrew, who's waiting for us.